He didn't even blink when he announced it, like I wasn't even in the room. It is with great pride, Arthur boomed, lifting his champagne glass, that I name our new regional director, my brilliant niece, Charlotte Monroe. The applause exploded instantly, but I couldn't hear it. Not really. I was too focused on the knot tightening in my stomach. 8 weeks. She'd been here for just 8 weeks, and I'd been promised that title 3 months ago. I sat still, hands clenched beneath the conference table. My jaw ached from smiling. I was good at this, pretending everything was fine, even when it felt like my soul had been gut-punched. Arthur made eye contact across the room, offering a slight nod, as if that made it better. Then he added, "Madeline has already been such a wonderful mentor to Charlotte. I know she'll continue to be a great asset in this transition." Mentor transition. I felt bile rise in my throat. My 3 years of 60-hour weeks team building and late-night client calls had just been dismissed with a smile and a title for someone younger, prettier, and family. I stood up that night calm and quiet, and I wrote a letter that would change everything. When I got home that night, the kitchen lights were warm and welcoming, but my heart felt frozen. Ethan, my husband of 10 years, greeted me with his usual calm smile. He was finishing up his famous chicken masala, humming to the jazz station, playing softly in the background. The scent of rosemary and garlic hung in the air, but I couldn't taste a thing. "You're home early," he said, turning around. Then he saw my face. I dropped my purse on the counter and pulled out a chair at the kitchen island. "Charlotte got the promotion." He froze. "What?" I nodded. "Arthur gave it to her this morning. Made a whole announcement. Champagne the works." Everyone applauded. Ethan's expression darkened. "You're kidding." "I wish I were." I picked at a loose thread on my sleeve. "He said I was going to be a great support during the transition." Ethan exhaled, sharp and angry. "After everything you've done, after all the times you pulled all-nighters and worked through weekends." I nodded again, eyes dry, voice calm. "Apparently, I'm not leadership material. But Charlotte, she brings fresh perspective." "Fresh perspective," he echoed. "She's been there less than 2 months. She still asks you how to find internal memos." I smiled bitterly. "Yeah, but she's family, and I'm just the dependable one." The rest of dinner was quiet. Ethan tried to stay upbeat, asking me about weekend plans and whether I still wanted to go to the art fair on Sunday. But my mind kept drifting back to Arthur's voice, the applause, and Charlotte's polished thank you speech. I'd replayed it in my head so many times already, and it hadn't even been a full day. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what it was all for. The missed birthdays, the cancelled vacations, the Thanksgiving I spent on a conference call with a supplier in Taiwan. All of it for what to be passed over for a 28-year-old with a LinkedIn full of buzzwords and a last name that happened to match Arthur's. By 3:00 a.m., I got out of bed and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea, staring out the window into the backyard. The moon was high, casting silver shadows across the lawn. That's when I pulled out my work laptop and opened the company directory. I stared at Charlotte's profile, no photo, barely any contact info, and clicked into her title. Regional Director. My old position. Or the one that was supposed to be mine. Then I opened a blank Word document and started writing. Not my resignation letter. Not yet. Just thoughts. Feelings. Rage that had turned cold. Sadness that had hardened into clarity. I wrote about what I'd built. How I'd grown the operations department from 12 employees to nearly 50. How I'd restructured our vendor relationships to save the company hundreds of thousands. How I'd trained 4 different junior managers who'd all gone on to promotions, none of them mine. I wrote about loyalty, about how I believed stupidly that doing good work would be enough, that Arthur saw me as more than a safety net, that my dedication would somehow override family politics. By dawn, I had 10 pages of raw, unfiltered emotion. It wasn't a resignation letter, but it was something else. A reckoning. The next morning, I walked into the office like nothing had changed. My makeup was perfect. My heels clicked confidently on the marble floor. But inside, I was no longer working for Olden Industries. I was gathering evidence, preparing for a quiet exit that would leave them scrambling. Charlotte showed up at my office door at 9:03, all smiles and Starbucks. "Hi, Madeline. Uncle Arthur said today would be a good time for us to start going over the client accounts." "Of course," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Let's begin with Tier 1. She sat and opened her pastel pink laptop. "I'm a little nervous," she giggled. "I want to make a good impression." I smiled politely. "Don't worry. You'll be fine as long as you listen carefully." For the next 2 hours, I walked her through our top 10 clients. I explained their preferences, their pain points, their quirks. I told her which ones expected personal calls on Mondays, which ones would walk if they didn't get a response within 2 hours, and which ones never wanted to be CC'd in group emails. Charlotte scribbled notes wide-eyed. "Wow, you really know all this by heart." 3 years of experience, I said dryly. "It adds up." I documented everything. Every account detail I shared. Every workflow, I explained every policy she hadn't read. By lunchtime, I had enough to fill a handbook. And still she didn't get it. At 12:15, I heated up leftover soup in the break room. As I stirred it, I heard voices from Arthur's office. The walls were paper thin. "The transition is going smoothly," Arthur said. "Charlotte's getting the hang of things. Are you sure Madeline's okay with all this?" Charlotte's voice hesitant, almost guilty. "She'll adapt," Arthur replied. "She always does. That's what makes her valuable. Predictable. Reliable. She'll stay because she doesn't have other options." I dropped my spoon. My breath caught in my throat. No other options. Was that what he really thought? Charlotte tried to defend me. "She's been really helpful. I can tell she's hurt, though." Arthur chuckled. "That's business, honey. She's had her run." I walked out of the break room without finishing my lunch. The hunger in my stomach had been replaced with something sharper resolve. That evening, after Ethan went to bed, I opened that Word document again. I deleted the emotional rants, the pages of venting, and I replaced them with one simple, powerful page. "Dear Arthur, please accept this letter as formal notice of my resignation." I formatted it cleanly, printed it on high-quality paper, signed it with a black fountain pen. Then I placed it in an envelope and slid it into my work bag. The next morning I wore my charcoal grey suit, the one I saved for client pitches and board meetings. My grandmother's brooch at the lapel red lipstick for confidence. At exactly 10:00 a.m., I walked into Arthur's office. He looked up, surprised. "Madeline, something wrong?" "No," I said, placing the envelope on his desk. "Just something I needed to deliver." He opened it, read the letter, and turned pale. "You can't be serious." "I am. But you're essential to this transition. Charlotte needs you. We need you." I smiled genuinely this time. Then maybe you should have promoted me when you had the chance. He tried bargaining, more money, a different title, a longer runway. But I wasn't negotiating. I was done. This isn't about a promotion, I said, standing. It's about respect. And I finally realized I'm never going to get it here. I walked out of his office with the lightest step I'd taken in months. And I had no idea what would come next, but I was finally free. The ripple effect of my resignation began almost immediately. By 11:30 that morning, Marie Arthur's longtime assistant came by my office with a careful knock and a look of confusion mixed with concern. "Everything all right, Madeline?" I smiled. "Never better." She studied me for a moment, before nodding, her lips tightening, like she knew more than she was letting on. As she walked away, I could hear the low hum of whispers spreading through the office. I didn't care. For once, I didn't feel the urge to explain, smooth over, or reassure anyone. That afternoon, Charlotte appeared at my door looking flustered. "Hey, Uncle Arthur says you're leaving." "Yes." Why, she asked, completely earnest. I thought things were going really well. I stared at her, at the innocent tilt of her head, the way she clutched her pastel planner like a lifeline. They were. Until they weren't. She blinked. "I don't understand." "You will. Eventually." I gathered my things and nodded at her notes. "Make sure you review the Morrison account again. You missed some key points." She glanced down at her notes, suddenly unsure of everything. By 4 Warsaw, Ethan had already heard from his sister, who'd heard from someone on Facebook, that I had stormed out of the office. I laughed when he asked. No storming, I assured him. Just a quiet walk toward something better. He grinned, pride and relief etched across his face. "I've never been more attracted to you." Over dinner, he asked what was next, and I admitted I had no idea. I might freelance for a bit. Update my resume. I've been wanting to mentor younger women in business. Maybe I'll start a blog. Or, he said, eyes twinkling, you could take a break and finally let someone else cook dinner for a change. I smiled and clinked my glass to his. But then 3 days later, the unexpected happened. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. "Hello, Madeline Carter." The voice was crisp, professional, but not unkind. "This is Rachel Lynn from Meridian Logistics. Do you have a moment?" I sat up straighter. Meridian was one of the fastest growing firms in the industry, known for poaching top talent. "Sure, how can I help you?" I was referred by Daniel Morse. He mentioned you'd recently left Alden Industries. My heart skipped. Daniel Morse was the president of Morrison Holdings, the client I'd nurtured for years, the account that made up 30% of Alden's revenue. "He said you were the reason they stayed with Alden." "As long as they did," Rachel continued. "We're currently restructuring and have a senior director role opening up. Daniel strongly suggested we speak with you." I was stunned. "That's very kind of him." "It's more than kind," she said with a slight laugh. He insisted. Within 24 hours, I was on a Zoom call with Meridian's VP of Operations. The role was everything I hadn't dared to dream of: oversight of multiple divisions' autonomy, in strategy, a salary nearly 40% higher than my previous one. As the interviews progressed, I realized just how different this company was. Every person I spoke to seemed genuinely interested in my experience, not just my resume. By the end of the week, Rachel called again. "We'd like to formally offer you the position of Executive Director of Strategic Accounts," she said. "We believe you're exactly who we need to take us to the next level." I accepted, not because it was better money, not because of the title, but because for the first time in years I felt seen. I started at Meridian on a Monday, 2 weeks after I'd walked out of Alden. Their headquarters was sleek and modern glass walls, ergonomic everything, and a collaborative energy that made Alden feel like a relic. On my first day, I was greeted with a welcome breakfast, a customized onboarding plan, and a handwritten card from Rachel that simply said, "We're so glad you're here." By Friday, I was sitting in on high-level meetings, not as a token woman in the room, but as a key decision-maker. But the real unexpected twist came 2 weeks later. My assistant knocked on my office door with a confused expression. "You might want to take this call." Line 2. I picked up the receiver. Madeline Carter. "Hi, it's Daniel Morse." My heart leapt. "Daniel, I didn't expect to hear from you directly." "I wanted to say thank you," he said simply. "We're already seeing improvements with our account under Meridian. It's clear your influence is making waves." "I appreciate that." He hesitated, then added, "Also, I thought you should know. We've officially ended our contract with Alden Industries." I wasn't surprised, but hearing it said out loud still hit hard. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said quietly. "No, you're not," he replied with a chuckle. "And you shouldn't be. They had something good, and they let it go." I hung up, staring at the phone for a long moment. Then I closed my office door and let myself feel it. Not guilt, not vindication, just relief. Relief that I'd trusted myself enough to walk away. The following week, 2 more former clients reached out. Then another. Each had a similar story: missed deadlines, tone-deaf interactions, and frustration with Charlotte's inexperience. And each one remembered how I'd handled things: quick responses, empathy, clarity, results. The truth was becoming obvious. I hadn't just been reliable. I'd been essential. Arthur just didn't realize it until it was too late. But by then, I had already moved on and up. I used to think loyalty was everything, that if you just worked hard enough, gave enough, stayed quiet and agreeable, someone up top would notice and reward you. That belief had been my compass for years. And yet all it did was lead me to a chair across from a man who smiled while asking me to train my own replacement. Now, weeks into my new role at Meridian, I was beginning to understand something that rattled me to my core: loyalty without boundaries isn't a virtue. It's a trap. It started small. During my second month, I walked into a team meeting and instinctively brought coffee for everyone. It was a habit from Alden, doing more than expected, always smoothing the rough edges. But here the reaction was different. "Madeline, thank you," said Ava, one of our junior analysts. "But we have a rotation for that. You're not supposed to bring anything on Tuesdays." She wasn't rude, just factual. And that simple statement hit me harder than I expected. At Alden, I'd spent so much time trying to fill in every gap, to anticipate everyone's needs before they even spoke. But here I was, a respected leader. Not a fixer, not a buffer. It was liberating and strange. More shifts followed. In meetings, people didn't talk over me. When I suggested something, it wasn't met with polite nods and silent dismissal. It sparked discussion. I wasn't the person whose input was noted, but ignored. I was the person they asked to lead. And that shift in how others saw me, it forced me to see myself differently too. At Alden, I had accepted invisibility as part of the job. I told myself it was just how things were. That being the dependable one meant being taken for granted. But now every day I showed up at Meridian, I felt something build inside me: a sense of agency. A sense that maybe I'd been wrong all along. It wasn't that I didn't deserve more. It was that I had stopped expecting it. One afternoon, I sat across from Sarah Bell, our Director of Client Growth, going over strategies for a complex new account. "You think we should consolidate vendor reports into a shared dashboard?" she asked. I nodded. It would cut down communication gaps and reduce client frustration. Plus, it'll force accountability, no more finger pointing. She leaned back, smiling. "I like how you think." At Olden, that idea would have been met with a patronizing, "we'll circle back," or worse. Someone else would pitch it a week later and take the credit. But here, Sarah scribbled a note, then added, "Can you walk us through that in next week's leadership sync?" That was it. No politics, no deflection, just progress. That night, I came home later than usual, tired but content. Ethan was in the kitchen chopping vegetables with a playlist humming in the background. I leaned against the doorframe, watching him for a moment. "You look different," he said when he saw me. "Do I?" He nodded. "Lighter. Like you finally took off a backpack you didn't know you were wearing." That made me laugh. "Yeah," I said. "I guess I did." We sat down to dinner and talked about his latest project, the upcoming holiday, and whether we should finally take that trip to Vancouver we'd put off for 2 years. For the first time in a long while, the future felt like something we could shape, not something I had to earn by suffering through the present. But the biggest shift came unexpectedly. I received an invitation, Alden Ventures Annual Recognition Gala. The same event I'd attended 3 years in a row, the same event where Arthur once praised me as a cornerstone of operational excellence. That phrase, "no laughably hollow," had once meant the world to me. I stared at the gold-embossed card, debating whether to toss it. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're not seriously going to that?" "I don't know," I replied honestly. "Maybe I should." "Why?" "So they can pretend they didn't shove you aside." "No. So I can see how far I've come." And that was it. The core of everything that had changed. I no longer needed their recognition. I didn't crave Arthur's validation. I didn't want to walk back in and prove them wrong. I just wanted to walk in and know deep in my bones that they never defined me in the first place. That evening, I went upstairs and pulled out a dress I hadn't worn in years. Deep sapphire sleek, but strong. A dress that made me feel powerful, not because of how I looked in it, but because of what it reminded me, that I had always had value, even when others refused to see it. The night of the event, I arrived with a calm heart and a clear mind. The ballroom hadn't changed, white linen string quartet, Arthur holding court near the stage, but I had. People greeted me with surprise, some with warmth, a few with visible discomfort. That was fine. I didn't come for them. When Arthur stepped onto the stage and announced a new award, Leadership Legacy, and called my name, the room erupted in polite applause. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I walked to the stage and accepted the crystal trophy, then turned to face the room that had once been my entire world. "Thank you," I said, voice steady. "This means a lot. Not because I need recognition, but because I now understand what it really means to lead." I paused. Leadership isn't about titles. It's not about proximity to power. It's about integrity, consistency, and knowing when to walk away from systems that no longer serve your growth. Silence. Then scattered applause. Then more. As I stepped down, Arthur caught my eye. There was something there. Not regret, not quite apology. Just a dawning awareness. Too late. Back at my table, Ethan raised his glass. "To clarity," he whispered, and I smiled, because I finally understood that leaving wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything. 2 weeks after the gala, I received a call from Rebecca Chen, our COO at Meridian. Her tone was casual, but I recognized that undercurrent of intensity she always carried when something big was brewing. "Madeline," she said, "are you free for coffee this afternoon?" Of course. She didn't say much more, just sent me an address. An upscale cafe near the downtown financial district, far from our usual haunts. I arrived 5 minutes early, already running scenarios in my head. Project expansion personnel. Reshuffle client escalation. When she walked in, she was wearing that slight, mysterious grin that usually preceded important conversations. "Thanks for meeting me off-site," she said as we settled in with lattes. I wanted to speak away from the usual distractions. "All good," I said, studying her expression. "What's on your mind?" Rebecca took a sip, then got straight to the point. "We're preparing to launch a new division client innovation strategy. Something lean, but high impact. Our largest partners are demanding deeper insight, forward-thinking solutions, and we need a department built solely for that." I nodded, intrigued. "Sounds like the next logical step." "It is," she said, setting her cup down. "And we want you to lead it." My heart skipped. "Wait, me?" She smiled. "Of course. You've transformed strategic accounts. Our retention rate is up 22% in 3 months. And let's not forget your restructure proposal. Marcus still talks about it in board meetings." I was stunned. Wow, thank you. Rebecca leaned forward. "You've already built trust with high-level clients, and you see things 5 steps ahead. That's what this role needs." "What would it look like?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline. "You'd build a small team, handpicked. 5 to 7 strategists. You'd report directly to Marcus and sit in on quarterly planning. It's a big jump, but we think you're ready." I felt the weight of the offer settle into my chest, not heavy but solid. Real. "Can I take a night to think about it?" "Of course, but we're hoping for a yes." I left the cafe with my thoughts racing. I called Ethan the second I got into the car. "She wants me to lead a whole new division." I told him, barely able to contain the excitement. I'd build it from the ground up. There was a pause on his end, then a laugh. "Why does this not surprise me? Of course they want you to lead something new. You're exactly the person to do it." We talked logistics that night, timeline responsibilities, what it might mean for our summer plans. But more than that, we talked about what it symbolized. "You know," he said, pouring us both glasses of wine, "I watched you spend years trying to convince people of your worth. Now you're in a place where no one has to be convinced. They already know." That hit me in the softest place. The next morning I walked into Rebecca's office with a nod. "Let's do it." And just like that, everything shifted again. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into planning. I met with department heads, studied client patterns, reviewed data with analytics. But more than that, I started building a team. Carefully, intentionally. I wasn't just looking for credentials, I wanted thinkers, listeners, people who'd challenge assumptions and approach strategy as both art and science. I hired Tomas, a data whisperer with an uncanny ability to predict client behavior. Then, Simone, whose background in psychology brought empathy to every engagement. Then Cara, a whip-smart project manager who could turn chaos into clockwork. By the end of the month, we had a dream team and a clear mission. Client innovation strategy wasn't about maintaining what existed. It was about creating what came next. At our first team meeting, I stood in front of the whiteboard, dry erase marker in hand. "We're not here to impress leadership," I told them. "We're here to change how we think about clients, what they want, before they even know it." They nodded, wide-eyed but excited. "Bring me the crazy ideas, the risks, the untested models. We'll test, refine, and deliver real value." No buzzwords, no fluff. And they delivered. Within 6 weeks, we'd launched 2 pilot programs, one using predictive modeling to adjust service levels based on seasonal trends, and another streamlining onboarding for new clients using AI and real-time feedback. The results were staggering. Revenue from existing accounts jumped. Client satisfaction scores soared. And most importantly, the team loved the work. They weren't just fulfilling job descriptions, they were building something new. Then came the unexpected email. Subject line, "Let's catch up." It was from Margaret. Yes, that Margaret from Alden Ventures. The same woman who once whispered apologies outside my office and handed me tissues when Arthur passed me over. I hadn't spoken to her since she'd quietly left Alden 4 months earlier. "Mind if we grab lunch next week?" the email read. "I have a proposition I think you'll want to hear." I was curious. We met at a small Italian place near Midtown, the kind of quiet spot where you could talk business without raising eyebrows. She looked different, lighter, like she'd left behind a burden. But her eyes were still sharp, still watching every nuance. After the usual pleasantries, she leaned in. "I've been talking to a few of the old guards," she said. "People who left Alden. People who were pushed out, passed over, or fed up." I raised an eyebrow. "Forming a club." She grinned. "Something like that. But more serious. We're looking into launching a consultancy focused on corporate transformation. Ethics-driven, people-focused. And we want you to be part of it." I blinked. "Margaret, that's ambitious." "It is," she said. "But you've done it. You've seen what happens when companies prioritize image over impact. We think there's a space for people like us to fix that for real." I didn't answer right away. The idea was powerful. A chance to make a broader impact. But I also had responsibilities at Meridian and a team that believed in me. "I'm honored," I said carefully. "Truly. But I have something special here. And it's still growing." She nodded. "I thought you'd say that. But if things ever change, or if you want to advise, we'd love your voice in the room." We parted with hugs and promises to keep in touch. That night, I journaled about the encounter. About the quiet satisfaction of being in demand, not because of politics or connections, but because of reputation results and relationships built with care. For years I had let others define my ceiling. Now I was busy building the rooftop deck. 6 months into my new role, I found myself in a place I'd never imagined, not just leading a high-performing team, but becoming the kind of leader I once desperately wished I had. It didn't happen overnight. Real growth, is quieter than I expected. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or applause. It unfolds in the margins, in the moments no one else sees. It was in how I handled conflict. Early on, Thomas clashed with Kara over a scheduling system. At Alden, I might have smoothed it over. Played mediator, tried to make everyone feel heard, just to preserve harmony. But this time, I didn't flinch from discomfort. I called them both into my office and said plainly, "We're not here to be right. We're here to build something better. What's more important to each of you, winning the argument or solving the problem?" That question reset the room. And afterwards, something changed in me. I wasn't afraid to lead anymore. It was in how I received feedback too. Simone once pulled me aside after a strategy session and said, "I think you cut off Ava a bit too early." She had more to say. At Alden, I might have bristled or dismissed it. But now I paused. "You're right. I'll check in with her." The next day, I asked Ava for a one-on-one, apologized, and let her take the lead. She lit up, and her idea, it ended up anchoring our entire client loyalty framework. Growth, I was learning, wasn't about being flawless. It was about being coachable. And as I grew, I started seeing changes outside the office too. Ethan noticed it first. "You don't apologize as much anymore," he said one night, while we were making dinner. "You used to say sorry every time you had an opinion. Now you just say what you think." I laughed. I guess I realized my voice isn't a disruption. It's a contribution. He wrapped his arms around me from behind. "I've always known that. I'm just glad you know it now too." My friendships deepened too. I reconnected with Naomi, a former colleague I'd lost touch with during the Alden years. We met for coffee one Saturday morning, and after 2 hours of non-stop conversation, she leaned back and said, "You're different now. Lighter. Like you trust yourself more." I did. For the first time in over a decade, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to grant me permission to speak, to rise, to matter. I'd stopped asking. I had simply started being. I found myself mentoring more often too. Younger women at Meridian started requesting time with me, not just for training, but to talk about confidence, about politics, about when to stay and when to walk away. One afternoon, a new hire named Jamie nervously asked if we could grab coffee. "I just feel like I'm always trying to prove I belong here," she admitted, eyes darting across the table. "Like if I don't get everything right, I'll be exposed as a fraud." I reached across, touched her hand. "That feeling, it's called imposter syndrome. And it's a liar." She blinked. "You've felt that." I smiled. "Every woman I've ever respected has felt it. But you don't have to believe it. Confidence isn't the absence of doubt. It's deciding your value doesn't evaporate when you make mistakes." Her shoulders dropped. "No one's ever said that to me before." Then I'm glad I did. Moments like that made all the difference. And each one reminded me of the woman I'd once been, the one sitting alone in her car, too stunned to go inside after being overlooked. I carried her with me, not out of shame, but as proof of how far I'd come. That version of me would have never dared challenge authority, propose radical changes, or say no to a demand that didn't feel right. But now I said no with clarity. I challenged directives when they didn't align with our values. I advocated not just for myself, but for the quietest person in the room. One of my proudest moments came during a company-wide leadership summit. Marcus, our CEO, had gathered directors from every division. As the sessions opened, he invited department leads to share best practices. Several spoke data-focused, KPI-laden presentations. Good. Impressive. Then Marcus gestured to me. "Madeline, want to talk about how you built your team?" I stood slowly. I hadn't prepared anything, but I knew exactly what I needed to say. I didn't build a team by finding the best resumes I began. I built it by finding people who listened well, asked smart questions, and challenged each other with respect. The room quieted. We don't innovate by adding more dashboards. We innovate by creating psychological safety, so people aren't afraid to bring us the ideas that scare them a little. I told them about Kara's resistance to a project that ended up saving us $180,000. About Simone's pushback that reshaped our feedback loop. About Ava's idea that launched a new retention strategy. And none of that happens if the leader is too afraid to be wrong, I said. So I make sure they know I'm not perfect. I just care deeply. And that's enough. When I sat down, the room was silent for a moment. Then Marcus clapped, slow, deliberate, proud. Others followed. Afterwards, Sarah from marketing came up to me. "You just gave the speech I wish I'd heard 10 years ago." And in that moment, I realized the truth. I hadn't just grown. I'd become the person I used to need. It was a rainy Tuesday, when the final thread from my old life tugged at my sleeve. I was in the middle of reviewing our upcoming innovation sprint schedule when my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in months. Arthur Alden. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds. Not curiosity, not fear, just calm. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, an email arrived. Subject: request for meeting. Madeline. I realize this may be unexpected, but I'd like to meet in person on neutral ground. There's something I need to say. Arthur. I forwarded the message to Rebecca with a note. Not business related. Just ghosts. Then I typed a short reply. Wednesday. Noon. Café Pierrot. The next day I arrived early. I sat near the window with a tea and watched the rain. There was something poetic about it, the man who once overlooked me now requesting my time. Arthur arrived 5 minutes late. His silver hair was thinner, shoulders more hunched. The power walk was gone. He paused when he saw me. For a moment, we both just stared, two people from opposite ends of a lesson. Then he sat. Thank you for agreeing to this, he began. I nodded but didn't speak. I've made a lot of mistakes, he said, eyes lowering, but none larger than letting you walk away without realizing what we were losing. Arthur, I said calmly, if you came for forgiveness, I already gave that to myself. He blinked, caught off guard. I came because I wanted you to know. We've lost 7 major accounts. Our board replaced 2 execs. The culture's fractured. And it started the day you left. I didn't flinch. That wasn't about me. That was about a system that refused to change. He sighed. I thought promoting Charlotte was the right move. Family continuity, energy, youth. But she wasn't ready. And truthfully, I didn't prepare her. You did. I looked at him directly. You didn't just undervalue me. You underestimated what happens when people finally decide they deserve more. He nodded slowly. You've built something remarkable. People in the industry talk about you like you're a movement. That surprised me, but I didn't show it. He leaned forward. If there's ever a way back, I raised a hand. Arthur, no. He looked down. Right. I figured. I softened slightly. I don't resent you. I just don't belong there anymore. There was a long pause. I think I needed to hear that he admitted. We talked for a few more minutes. Small talk, polite exchanges. And then I stood. As I gathered my coat, he said quietly, "Thank you for being better than I was." I didn't turn around. I had to be. That night, as Ethan and I curled up on the couch with takeout and a movie, I told him about the meeting. Do you feel closure? He asked. No, I said, smiling. I feel completion. There's a difference. Closure is something we crave from others. But completion, that's something we give ourselves. In the months that followed, Meridian continued to grow. Our client innovation division became a blueprint for other departments. I was invited to speak at panels, mentor across industries, and consult with executives who once wouldn't return my emails. But the most profound moment came one ordinary Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing client feedback reports when Ava knocked on my door. Got a second? Of course. She stepped in, hesitant. I just wanted to say, thank you. You probably don't realize how much it means to be seen. To feel safe enough to speak up. I set down my pen. I do. Because I spent years in places where I didn't. She nodded. I want to be that kind of leader someday. You already are, I said. You just haven't realized it yet. That night, I opened the top drawer of my home office and pulled out the letter I wrote to Arthur so long ago. The one that began my exodus, my rebirth. I read it once more, and then without ceremony I shredded it. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I no longer needed it to remember who I was. Sometimes redemption doesn't come from apologies or revenge. Sometimes it comes from living the life you were told you couldn't have, from walking into rooms that once shut you out and building your own door instead, from realizing that the very people who doubted you were never your ceiling. You were. And once you tear that down, the sky isn't even the limit anymore. If there's one truth I walked away with, it's this: loyalty without boundaries is just self-betrayal dressed up as virtue. I spent years believing that hard work alone would speak for itself. That if I kept showing up, kept delivering, someone would eventually reward me. But the truth is, staying somewhere that doesn't value you isn't noble, it's costly. It costs your confidence, your time, and often your peace. You can be dependable and still demand better. You can be gracious and still say no more. And most importantly, you can walk away without bitterness, knowing you gave your all, but you refuse to give it to people who treat it like it's disposable. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave quietly, with your head high and your value intact. Because when you finally stop trying to prove your worth to the wrong people, the right ones will already see it. Take inventory of where your time, energy, and talent go. Are you investing in environments that challenge you, respect you, and grow you? Or are you stuck in cycles of hoping for approval that never comes? If you're constantly overlooked, it's not a sign to work harder, it's a sign to look elsewhere. Update your resume. Schedule that informational interview. Reach out to someone in the field you admire. And if walking away isn't immediately possible, start preparing silently. Document your wins. Know your worth. Position yourself for the moment you can say, "I choose better." Because you deserve to work somewhere that doesn't just use your potential, but unleashes it.